The Bible mentions God sending hornets in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Joshua to drive out Canaanites and other enemies of the Israelites. When the people of Israel were freed from slavery in Egypt, their journey was far from over. God had promised them a land of their own, a rich land flowing with milk and honey, filled with vineyards, rivers, and fields ready to produce good crops. But there was a problem. The land was already filled with other nations, strong nations with walled cities, skilled warriors, and powerful armies. The Israelites were not soldiers. They were former slaves, weary travelers carrying children, animals, and whatever belongings they could carry. They had no experience in war. On their own, they had no chance of conquering such nations. Yet God told them they would inherit the land. God's promise came with a plan that sounded both unusual and impossible. He told the Israelites that He Himself would go ahead of them and prepare the way. He said He would use hornets, small but fierce stinging insects, to drive out their enemies. Imagine that for a moment, not swords, not mighty armies, not great storms or earthquakes, but hornets. These buzzing, stinging creatures would become God's soldiers, chasing away nations much stronger than Israel. It was a strange and powerful promise. God also explained something very important. The enemies would not be removed all at once. Instead, He would drive them out little by little. At first, this might have been disappointing for the Israelites. They wanted instant victory. Why wait? But God's reasoning was wise. If the land was emptied too quickly, it would become wild and overgrown. Dangerous animals would move in, and Israel would not yet be ready to care for it all. By clearing the land slowly, God gave His people time to grow stronger, organize their communities, and learn to depend on Him more and more. Think about the picture this paints. Armies prepare with swords, shields, chariots, and strategies. They train their men and build alliances. But God's plan was entirely different. He showed them that He did not need human strength or human weapons to accomplish His purpose. He could use something as small and common as hornets to defeat entire nations. What the nations saw as tiny and insignificant, God used as a weapon that struck terror into the hearts of warriors. Now imagine the fear of those people living in Canaan when the swarms of hornets came. Warriors who had faced battles without trembling suddenly found themselves helpless. How do you fight against an army of stinging insects? You cannot hold up a shield against them. You cannot swing a sword at them. They fly into your homes, your food, your fields. The sting of even one hornet is painful, but a swarm, it would be unbearable. Strong, brave men would run, families would flee, and entire cities would be abandoned. The sound of the buzzing wings alone would be enough to spread panic. For Israel, this was a lesson in trust. They were learning that their success would never depend on their own ability, but on God's power. Every time they saw nations fleeing before them, they would know it was not because of their swords, but because of God's hand. The hornets were a sign that God was fighting for them in ways they would have never imagined. But this story is not only about insects or battles long ago. It carries lessons that are deeply relevant for us today. How often do we face struggles that feel much too big for us? Perhaps it's a problem at work, a financial burden, a broken relationship, or a challenge within ourselves. We look at it and say, I am not strong enough to face this, and we're right. But this is exactly where God steps in. Just as He used hornets to fight battles Israel could not win, He can use unexpected, surprising, even small things to bring us victory. Notice also how God chose to act gradually, little by little. that can be hard for us to accept. We want immediate solutions, quick results, and instant answers. But God's ways are different. He understands that if He gave us everything all at once, it might overwhelm us. We might not be ready to handle it. Just like Israel, we need time to grow stronger, wiser, and more prepared. God's slow and steady work is not a delay, it is a gift of protection. His timing is always perfect. Think of a garden. If you try to plant too much at once without preparing the soil, weeds and pests will quickly take over. But if you plant little by little, caring for each part as it grows, you end up with a strong and fruitful harvest. God was treating the promised land like that garden, giving it to Israel step by step, making sure they could care for it properly. There's also a deeper meaning here. The nations in the land were not innocent. Many practiced idolatry, child sacrifice, and cruelty. God's judgment was coming upon them. Yet even here, His mercy was visible. By driving them out gradually, He gave them time to see His power and repent if they chose. But those who hardened their hearts and refused to turn would eventually face the full force of His judgment. For us, the picture of God using hornets reminds us that He is not limited by what we consider powerful. We often look for big solutions, money, influence, or strength. But God shows that even something small, something the entire world might overlook, can become His tool for victory. It may be a conversation with a friend, a small act of kindness, or even a simple opportunity that seems unimportant at first. God can take what looks small and use it to bring about great change. So when you hear the story of God sending hornets, remember that it is really about trust, patience, and perspective. Trust that God is working even if His methods seem unusual. Patience to wait for His timing, knowing He gives us victories step by step. And perspective to recognize that He can use anything, no matter how small, to bring His plans to life. Picture the Israelites standing on the edge of the promised land. They see cities with tall walls and warriors stronger than they could ever defeat. Fear rises in their hearts, but then they remember God's promise, "I will send hornets ahead of you." Suddenly they understand. Their victory is not about their strength, but about God's power, and that same truth speaks to us today. Whatever you are facing, remember this: you do not have to fight in your own strength. God is able to clear the path before you, sometimes in ways you could never imagine. He can fight battles you cannot win. He can move obstacles that seem really impossible. And He often does it not with grand displays of force, but with small, surprising, and creative means, just as He did with hornets. Thank you for listening to this story. May it encourage you to see your challenges in a new way. When life feels overwhelming, when the battles seem too big, remember that God goes before you. Have trust in His timing, trust His power, and be ready for Him to work in unexpected ways. Because sometimes the very things that seem small and ordinary, like hornets, become the instruments of His greatest victories.